Hey everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia back with the latest episode of Code Reds on the CLNS Media Network. My sincere pleasure to welcome one of the most talented play-by-play broadcasters in all of Major League Baseball, John Sadak. He is the voice of the Reds on Bally Sports Ohio, and has taken some time out this morning to discuss the fate of the state, I should say, of the Cincinnati Reds and what has been a 3-1 start to the season. John, thanks so much for taking time out.
You got it, Trags. Glad to be with you.
So, what a start to the season. First of all, you had what I thought, John, was a near perfect start to the season, the 8-2 win over the Washington Nationals on opening day. Then you had the hiccup on Saturday where Alexis Diaz cannot protect the 6-4 lead in the top of the ninth inning. And then the Reds one strike away from falling to 1-2 on the season and losing that series. Jonathan India doubles, 2-run homer from Will Benson on a first pitch splitter, and then an 0-1 splitter hit out of the ballpark by Christian Encarnacion Strand. What a swing he put on that ball. I really think, John, and I asked this of a couple of the players after the game, that single moment can be an early turning point for this team.
Yeah, I would agree. I would look at it more so, though, as a continuation of last year. I mean, I think this identity was already forged by most of the entire 2023 season. And a big chunk of that was the younger players arriving and affirming their roles in the big leagues. Guys like Will Benson and Christian Encarnacion Strand. And yeah, I mean, I think there are always emotional moments that can happen in the early stage of the year. But I feel like this team kind of had that identity going into last year that did not show itself for the first 3 weeks of the season. And then as the personnel changed and their sense of confidence continued to swell, they performed like it more and more and more. And I see that as entirely bridging from 23 into 24. I think it's who these guys are.
And the Rally Reds. And
Yeah.
that's certainly what their moniker became last season. Came up just 2 games shy, of course, of the postseason. I've told people on this podcast the last couple of weeks, John, that I love what Nick Kroll has done in terms of adding depth to the roster. Certainly in the bullpen, where I think everyone saw what happened at the end of last year when the starting rotation just simply could not get deep enough into games, and the bullpen became taxed at the very end. Nick Kroll did, I think, a terrific job of adding arms there, certainly with a guy like Brent Suter, who we've already seen, John. I think it's safe to say his impact on this team.
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, he got the final 6 outs of the initial game. He limited damage in a major pickle the second time he was into a game. The game, we're recording this on the Tuesday of the Phillies series. Last night wasn't his cleanest showing. But yes, he's made impact on the field in just a handful of appearances. And I also think, to your point, his presence, Emilio Pagan, Frankie Montas, Nick Martinez, these are smart, more veteran guys that I think also make their teammates better by the ability to watch them do what they do and to sit next to them while they watch their teammates do what they do and kind of just discuss strategy, thought process, share video with one another. I think that's a really big deal.
Yeah, and I just like the chemistry in the clubhouse. And I was one of the reasons it was important, I think, for me to head out to Arizona and get my eyes on this team a couple of times. First of all, just after pictures and captures reported in February, and then again as games were underway in mid-March. You get a sense of how the team comes together. That's one of the biggest things to me, more than the wins and losses, of course, in spring training, is do the pitchers get their arms built up in time to really be ready for the regular season to begin? And what is the chemistry? What are these guys going to be like for 6 months, 7 months, hopefully 8 months together nonstop? That's the biggest reason that teams really spend time in spring training, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, with this group, I think in a similar fashion to what I said earlier, I
Yeah.
think that identity was really forged, and I think they were selective in the ads that they made because they would fit in personality and work ethic along with their skill sets. Yeah, to me, I mean, the biggest function of spring training is just physically making sure that you're ready for the season.
Right.
And I do think there's a lot to what you're talking about the buildup of pitchers, because we saw in the truncated spring, in the wake of the labor dispute. I thought that a lot of teams, and perhaps most pronounced the Reds, were not as stretched out as ideally they would be to be prepared to pitch for the season. Where this year they look to be in really good shape, and a big part of that is the depth you're talking about. Nick Martinez is a guy that can vacillate between rotation and bullpen, and is a starter right now, and deservedly so. The addition of Frankie Montas, yeah, at one point they had low double-digit guys essentially competing for the 5 starting spots, and they're going to have a good problem on April 10th, assuming his next AAA outing goes well, that Nick Lodolo is likely going to rejoin. And do you go 6-man? Do you send somebody to the bullpen? Do you send somebody down? And they're going to be in a good spot where they're going to have several arms at AAA at any one given time that are very capable, that have pitched well in the big leagues, that are available as needs arise.
Yeah, and I really do think that every one of these pictures, these starting pictures, David Bell has the confidence they can go 6 or 7 innings. I think on lesser teams, you're hopeful perhaps that, your 4 or 5 gets deep into a game, or in some cases, and certainly the Tampa Bay Rays, made a formula of success, going with the opener. But I think the Reds obviously are moving away from that kind of strategy and would like to see their starting pitcher get deep into games. And I thought Monday night was an interesting study in what makes Andrew Abbott so unique and so special in this rotation. He did not look overwhelming in the first 2 innings, but he managed to get through those first 2 innings. And then you look up and all of a sudden he's 1 out deep into the 6th inning. I think that's a big deal.
I agree. I think he knows how to pitch. I would also caution in that first inning, it was some soft contact. I mean, the 2-run double was a squibber that was put in the exact right spot. Encarnacion Strand's playing off the line as he should, with a pull righty like Bohm up at the plate. But I think you're right on with the composure, too, that he has to maintain. And that's something he showed last year. In his debut. Remember, he was a very high pitch count to kind of grind through the first couple of innings. His dad was with Jim Day in the stands saying, yeah, he's got to tighten that up a little bit. And he will, and he did.
Yes.
But yeah, he's a very, very capable, smart pitcher who recognizes matchups and situations, reads hitters. I think that's a skill that's faded throughout the game some over the last, particularly decade plus, in the era of the iPad metrics, which do have value, but I think the perfect marriage is a blend of everything together. Balance is always key, and he possesses that because he has that instinctive kind of feel. He knows what he's doing. He's a really good pitcher.
Another point I want to get to about Monday night's game, John, is the performance of Alexis Diaz in high leverage. Now, the irony is, to me, we hear so often that closers like to come in to clean innings and get the job done, get their 3 outs, especially if it's a 1 or 2 run game like it was Saturday against Washington. Well, the script was flipped on Monday night. He comes into an incredibly difficult situation, high leverage, obviously, with runners, I believe, on first and second and 1 out. Brent Suter did get Bryce Harper to line out to the outfield for the first out. And then he comes in, Alexis Diaz, with 2 runners on, 1 out, and gets out of that jam. Now, he did pick off a runner on second base. Phillies were not good running the bases. They were atrocious on Monday night, and the Reds, to their credit, took advantage of that. But can you speak to what it meant for Alexis Diaz to get out back on the bump and kind of get that performance under him on Monday night?
Yeah, I think there's always value in pitching well. Confidence begets confidence all the time. And he confessed after he had that rough first outing that, he did get squeezed, I thought, by CB Buckner of those pitches in sequence on the walk. I thought one was true borderline. 2 others are near the edge, but they're on the edge, and they were great pitches, and they were strikes. And I think that had to have some impact, right? Because Alexis himself confessed that he totally lost the zone thereafter. And you're watching the inning, you can readily see it. But I do think it's a big deal that against a good lineup, a meaty,
Right.
pretty deep lineup, that he was able to bridge and get 5 outs. And I would say the awareness and steadiness to execute a pickoff. I mean, a pickoff play at second base is a little bit of high risk. Yeah, you make the wrong throw there, and that can have really significant consequences. So I do think it's always a big deal to pitch well. But I think as you talk to any of these Reds players and you speak to Alexis himself, I don't know that there was any wavering in a sense of belief from them. I mean, I think
Right.
they feel very confident in who and what Alexis Diaz is. Um, but yeah, it's a really hard, unforgiving game. Even the best can have bad days. I mean, Finnegan has a lot of talent for Washington, and the Reds, down to their last strike, were able to take advantage against him. So anytime you can go out there and get the job done, I think that's always a good thing.
You mentioned it on the broadcast Monday night, how good the teammates have to feel for TJ Antone, given what he's been through, the Tommy John surgeries and all of the rehab that he has had to go through to get back and getting that opportunity on Monday night. Now, during spring training, I thought Derek Johnson, pitching coach for the Reds, he made it clear if he's healthy, TJ Antone is part of that bullpen. And on Monday night, it took him a little while to find a groove, but once he did, again, striking out Bryce Harper, I thought was just, a really terrific piece of work there by TJ Antone, and really what it really kind of reflected the kind of raw talent that he has once he finds the strike zone.
Yeah, I mean he's a totally redefined version of himself. And
Right.
that's something that, he'll readily tell any of us when you go up and talk to him. He's one of the nicest men on the planet. I mean, it just
Yes.
the ultimate kind of guy to root for. So giving in service to others, both on and off the field. And yeah, he was Captain Hook. He was like the poster child for pitching ninja, throwing breaking balls that had such incredible spin that they looked like a movie special effect more than a real delivery that was repeatable. And with multiple arm injuries, he'll tell you, I had to learn how to pitch and not just be a thrower. And that's a cliche that's used excessively, but I think with him is specifically really on point, because the stuff was so sensational that it could overwhelm even really good hitters when executed. And now he's living on a sinker that's 92, that he's got a spot. The breaking ball is still good, but it's not the same breaking ball. It's got different shape and feel to it. And to some extent, you're almost kind of learning on the fly, because the amount of innings that he's had with this version of himself is still very minuscule. And game situations in the regular season, when stuff matters, that's different. I love numbers. I think a lot of numbers have tremendous value, but I also believe that these are human beings.
Yep.
And I don't know that you can exactly define clutch. I don't know that it always applies to everyone and everything, but I do think specific situations, yes, there is that emotional element that if you're watching and you're human, you can read that moment, and some guys do better than others. And that was a huge, huge moment for Antone, and really significant. And when you're talking about the concept of the idea of like springboard moments, I think for individuals, even moreover, that can be particularly true at the start of the season. And so for Antone, I also think maybe for Encarnacion Strand with that home run he had, I think those moments can very much springboard those individuals.
So I want to move back, bouncing all over the place here, but go back to that game on Sunday, just because I think it could be a very important game, a significant game. And it was just such a fun game for Reds fans at the end who stayed to the very end. I actually ran into, John, I ran into Dan Picture, the new Bengals offensive coordinator, with his wife and his child, leaving the ballpark on my way down to the press room, and we looked at each other, and I asked him, you know what? And he said, that's why you stay to the end of the game. And I'm like, exactly right. And I thought Sunday was so important on so many levels, because when you win a game like that, it goes in the bank, and I wrote this on CLNSCincy.com. It is the kind of game you draw upon. Yes, that they certainly draw upon what they did last year, and we covered that earlier, the Rally Reds of 2023. But when they're in mid-May, okay, and they're down, let's say 4-2 in the bottom of the ninth inning, they'll think about that game in the back of their minds.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd also, though, the same thing I said earlier. Like I think they think of the, what was it? 33 comeback wins last year and
Yep.
10 walk-off wins last year. And I think for the overwhelming core of this team, they're already rather acutely aware of and kind of have felt that, for a couple of years running. And I think it's going to go beyond, Trags. I think that's going to be the identity of this team for probably this window with this core group, which hopefully is going to be a good 4 or 5 year span.
And I'm glad you brought that up because we're talking about windows now for the Reds, and the Reds window is open. Would you agree that is undeniably the case? The window is now open for these Reds?
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, because you have a ton of young, talented players. And I do think there's a lot to what you're talking about, the connectivity and the culture that's there. I think that's real. And I think that is a positive part of how this team achieves what it achieves. And the blunt reality is because they're really young, talented players, they're under cost control. And so
Yes.
that is the window in today's game. I mean, that's even true of the bigger markets that are flush with cash to be able to add through free agency. There still are managed windows where the talent matches up with payroll. And yeah, like it's professional sport. So that's a huge part of it, that you can keep all these guys together, that you can selectively add pieces as you need it, because stuff happens. Guys get hurt. Matt McLean, TJ Friedel get hurt. Sometimes guys will underperform, and that could still happen this year. There's probably going to be at least one guy who's a returning player who we all feel very confident about that's going to hit a really rough patch that might last a month, might last 3 months. The game is really hard. But when you have that many people, not only do you have those options to plug holes with internal talent, but they also, by combination of their major league depth and their minor league depth, particularly AA and below, if they have to trade to go get somebody, they have the player redundancy and inventory that they can take a chance to fill a position of need.
No question about that. And I think that's where, again, Nick Krall really understands how to build this roster, a young team with a very young core, selectively add veterans. And he's done that. Certainly, we've already pointed that out in the bullpen. I think getting a guy like Santiago Espinal to go along with, a Jamer Candelario, who's already had a significant impact on these Reds. Those are the kind of moves that I think a lot of fans may look over or gloss over, but they matter. They really do matter.
Yeah, it's I think particularly in the case of both of those guys, their defensive versatility. I think that's something that has a lot of value as long as it's not a gimmick or a forced, point of entry. When it's legitimate, and it is legitimate. Espinal can play 3 spots on the infield and play them well. I mean, the Blue Jays folks that I've spoken to said they thought he had Gold Glove caliber skill, and it was just a matter of the playing time for him to be able to be out there on a regular basis. And Candelario, in similar fashion, he can float around first, second, and third base. He's been at third, and I think he's looked pretty darn good there. He has made not the world's most difficult plays, but they haven't been easy routine all the time. And he's seen a pretty good amount of action through 4 games, and he's handled every play cleanly.
What makes you so good, John Sadak, at capturing the moment at the end of the game? I mean, obviously your calls of Will Benson and Christian Encarnacion Strand at the end of the game Sunday, memorable. Every Reds fan heard them. What goes in your mind to making those calls spontaneous and heartfelt?
Well, first of all, I can't say that any of my own work is good. I always feel awkward and sheepish with that.
I can, and I'm going to tell you, I can do that as the host of this podcast with you on, as a very terrific guest and a very appreciative guest from my point of view. But I can say that. So I guess I'll ask it another way. Um, what are the challenges of making sure you get those calls right, or they just come out?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I don't ever in my baseball work so far have anything scripted. When I've done championship level events, I did the women's Final Four and title game for a half dozen years. I've done Final Fours of multiple other collegiate sports. Then I do have a basic idea. I don't script it, but there's a structure to, like, if this team wins, depending upon how the game goes, I think I want to say something like this,
Right.
and then organically react. In baseball, I don't do that. I mean, it's just you kind of just try to mentally go through. I think in similar fashion to what players do, both hitters, fielders, pitchers. You're trying to anticipate if A, then B. So I try to have an idea, and that's one of the joys of covering one team is that you have a sense of anticipation. When Encarnacion Strand stood in and he's 0 for 12,
Mm-hmm.
I thought he was going to homer. Like
That's what I. Yep.
so I do then in that moment, I'm just thinking like, but the reaction is truly a reaction. So there is some of that informed element that I am trying to mentally prepare my brain for that. But to me, that's the great joy of covering live event sports as a play-by-play announcer. It's what was so intoxicating to me that gave me the bug when I was in college, is that it's the last true unscripted drama that our world has.
Uh,
And that's
so
the
well
fun.
said.
Yeah, that's the fun. Is just like your job is to marry up a combination of preparation, um, feel for what that moment is. You try to capture what it is, for the player, for those in the stands, for those that are watching at home, and you try the best you can to match it. And many years ago, I had someone that was close to me share what Dan Schulman had done for a long time. And I think Dan is a terrific talent on everything he does. His baseball
Yep.
and basketball work are exceptional, radio and TV. And Dan, earlier in his career, I don't know if he still does this, he would have like a notepad alongside him during games. And as moments happened, he would write down on a scale of 1 to 10 where he felt he was in relation to the moment. And then he'd go back and watch that part of the game. Like, or now that I'm detached from it, does the number match what I'm now seeing and feeling?
That's
And does it also
fascinating.
then match the moment to kind of like set that internal temperature, to kind of be ready for it? And it's something that I used over the course of time. And I think that
Hmm.
goes in many ways. I mean, that's energy, it's word usage, it's and on TV doing baseball, for me, when that big moment happens, the usual formula is try to fairly concisely match that moment, lay out, let the crowd react, let our director cut, let the show be the reaction of the stadium environment. And then as the guy rounds third or crosses home, you can perhaps add a tagline, or maybe that's room for the analyst. Or in some situations, it's nothing. It's just the celebration the rest of the way.
So you did, John Sadak, and we'll wrap it up here. I'm going to wrap it up. Women's college basketball, it is certainly white hot right now. It is really, really a hot topic of conversation. The women's Final Four, of course, will be in Cleveland. And you called how many of them? 6?
I believe that's right. It was the biggest moments were Mississippi State snapping UConn's
I,
all-time win streak.
I remember that
Uh,
game.
the mid lane jumper in Tampa, the Arika and Gumbawale buzzer beaters that happened in succession in the semis in the title game with Notre Dame.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a tremendous amount of fun. But then, of course, COVID claimed the 20 season, and then in 21, it directly overlaps with baseball, and I was graced with the Reds job, so no longer on the call for that. But that was a really fun event to work.
How excited are you for women's college basketball now to see Caitlin Clark and that her epic performance Monday night while you were calling the game in Philadelphia? 41 points, double-digit rebounds. How excited are you for the women's game?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's thrilling. I was fortunate to do a lot of stuff earlier in my career, and I spent almost 10 years simultaneously calling basketball at Princeton and the University of Delaware. And Princeton, the first 3 years were with their women's team that was very good. Bill Cower's daughter, Meg, was an outstanding player, Ivy Player of the Year. And then I spent that entire time covering the women's team at Delaware. There were two different tournament teams there. Tiara Malcolm, who was a stellar in-state talent, who was a Player of the Year in the CAA, and then Elena Deladon, who was the female LeBron James at one point. You know, she was on the cover of SI in 7th grade. She's been a WNBA MVP. She's won the gold medal, and had a chance to cover her nightly. She dropped 54 in a game, basically shooting by herself. It's a tremendous amount of fun. And as a proud girl dad, I think being able to see that take over a bigger part of the whole public consciousness of becoming a much grander, more wide viewed event is a big deal.
From one girl dad to another, John Sadak, I want to say thank you very much for taking time out on this episode of Code Reds. It was, I just love having you on, John, because you cover so many topics and you cover them so well.
Thank you, Trags. I appreciate it. Go Reds.
All right. He is John Sadak, the one and only voice of the Cincinnati Reds on Bally Sports Ohio. I want to thank everybody for downloading this episode of Code Reds.